Good evening, everybody. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from musicologist Ed Kottick on the topic of harpsichord decoration. So if you please help me welcome Ed.
I may sit down every once in a while. My back is not as young as it used to be.
You're going to get a microphone.
I'm sorry?
Your microphone on?
Oh, what is it? There we go. Okay. I don't know that it's needed, but.
Yes, it's great.
Okay. If it's too much, just let me know. Okay. Fleet frolic through harpsichord decoration. Why in the world would anybody want to decorate a harpsichord? It's a musical instrument after all. But, you know, harpsichords really had their heyday during a time when almost everything was decorated. If you had money, you showed it off by decorating whatever you had. So instruments certainly were decorated. And harpsichords are great candidates for decoration because they have all these flat areas, large flat areas. Harpsichords were invented at the end of the 14th century, so it's been around for a long time. But piano is just an upstart. And it has all these different traditions of building that built differently in different areas of Europe. So we'll look at Italy, 16th to 18th century, Flemish, mainly 17th century, and French, Northern German, and English, mainly 18th century. And then a little bit of 20th, 21st century.
What happened in the 19th century?
The 19th century, the harpsichord was pretty dormant.
Wow.
It was still around, but there were a few aficionados who played it and collected it. A lot of people collected it. But the harpsichord was not revived until 1890. That was when the first modern harpsichord was built. That's another talk. So the elements of the harpsichord that call for decoration, oops. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, there we go. Or the outside of the case, its exterior, the inside of the lid, the sound well in here, and the stand, which you can't see too well here. Now, this instrument is certainly taking advantage of its surfaces. It's decorated, every possible surface is decorated. And we will take a closer look at this instrument a little later on. So after all that fancy decoration, what do we have here? Well, this is a typical 17th century Italian harpsichord. And it's decorated in its own way. First of all, the shape is very elegant. Beautiful, deeply curved bedside, sharp tail. The key well is almost always boxwood naturals and stained fruit wood, stained black. The most obvious thing about these Italian instruments are their moldings. The size of these cases are only about 3/16 of an inch, very thin. So in order to strengthen the case, as well as to present a sort of architectural look, you have these moldings that go around the case. It's an outer molding here, and there's an inner molding as well, and then a cap molding that goes over the top, and a bottom molding. The moldings go around a thing like rubber bands. You have this scroll sawn cheek here that's very elegant, and a rose. Rose has no acoustical significance, but it is a decorative element. Here are a couple of Italian roses. I wonder if we could dim the lights here a little bit. Yeah. Matter of fact, yeah. Oh, there we go. parchment. This one's from wood. This is an Italian harpsichord, believe it or not. But I said that they were very thin case instruments. They often put them in an outer case. So this is an inner instrument looking very much like the one we saw a minute ago, in an outer case. Now the outer case could be decorated. They usually was, almost always was. Painted, anything decorated any way you wanted. Fancy, not fancy. This is just plain black paint. Nothing fancy about that. But if you withdrew this instrument from the case, you see something that looked like the one we saw a minute ago. This is a very elaborately decorated instrument, and you might think, oh, well, he said that's an inner instrument in an outer case. And it looks like it too. You can see that sort of inner instrument and the moldings and so on. Actually, it's not. It's an integral case instrument. It looks like it's an inner instrument in an outer case. We call it a false inner outer. Yeah, kind of stupid name. Italian Flubbeputi. And here they are on the outside doing happy things. This thing has a mind of its own here. I don't know what's going on. Okay. All right. Doing goofy things, and the lid painting is a nice bucolic scene. Bucolic scenes were very common. Always with a finger in some of those videos. Got standing right here. This is a true inner outer, an inner instrument in an outer case. But I promised you floozies, remember? So here's our first floozy. And that's the goddess Venus with Cupid looking over her shoulder. Cupid is her son. And on the outside of the case, decorated in what's called grisaille, what's kind of grayish scale, are those Italian putti again. The stand is typical Italian. There's 2 table stands, one in front with 2 legs, one in the back with 1 leg. There's a better shot of Goddess Venus. And these putti are playing musical instruments too, which is really nice. I don't know what they're doing here, I don't want to know. This is a very elaborately decorated true inner outer. It's decorated in gold and white paint. And when I say gold, every time I say gold, it's not gold paint. It's honest to God gold leaf. There were some builders who used gold paint, but we don't talk about that. Look at the elaborate stand that's turned. This thing's going backwards. I'm sorry, I don't understand this thing. Maybe I should turn around. That doesn't want to move. Oh, you got the touch.
I think sometimes it's easier to press hold.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. And I love this thing. The lions here guarding the instrument. Again, 2 table stands, one with 2 legs and one back here on 1 leg. The lid painting is a fairly common motif. It's Apollo and the 9 Muses. And this one is hard to see, but it's Apollo flaying Marsyas. I don't know if you know that story, but Marsyas was a satyr. And he was walking along one day and he saw an Aeolus laying on the ground. An Aeolus is a kind of a Greek oboe. And he picked it up and started playing it, and he actually got pretty good. He got so good that he challenged Apollo to a musical contest. Apollo, of course, the god of music. Not a smart move. So a court was assembled, one of whom was King Midas, and they had the contest. Guess what? Apollo won. And they had decided that the winner would do whatever he wanted to the loser. So Apollo flayed Marsyas and skinned him alive for the temerity to challenge him. By the way, King Midas was the only one who voted against Apollo. And because of that, Apollo gave him donkey's ears. This harpsichord is not much when we can talk about that, but look at this stand, talk about ladder. And these two booty, imagine 500 years they've been holding that harpsichord on their head. Ouch! I'm sorry?
It looks small.
It is small. It's a small instrument, yeah. This instrument, some of you may have seen this instrument. It's in the New York Metropolitan Museum. Anyone seen it? Oh, okay. Next time you go to New York to the Metropolitan Museum, go to the Merton's Music Gallery, and you'll see this here. It's one of the most elaborate instruments ever made. It's called the Golden Harpsichord. In fact, it should be called the Golden Harpsichord case, because there's an instrument inside the case. But on the outside of the case, it's carved the triumphs of Galatea, and then the whole thing is gilded. Yes, ma'am?
Is it still playable? Can you still?
Yes. So I am told. I haven't heard it or played it myself, but yeah. So I am told. I love this stand. You have these two Trojans who are struggling to keep that instrument afloat. I mean, look at the grimace on his face. Look at the way those muscles are straining. I mean, this is Baroque with a capital B. And you have these two naiads, and don't drop it, fellas, please. And this is coming out of the water. You can see the waves. Then back here, you have a Pluto who's sitting on a seashell. And the seashell is sitting on a dolphin. I'll talk about the dolphin in a minute, because that has some significance. But he also is saying, don't back it up, guys. So it's an incredible sight. It really is. So if we sum this all up, the Italian cases are plain wood, but they use these architectural, finely cut moldings. Outer cases, anything can happen. Lid interior, variety of painted finishes. Sometimes you find a painting. Soundboards, the only decoration you had was this geometric rose. Keywell usually boxwood naturals and black stained sharps. Scroll saw sheets were common. The stand, the separate table stands were usual. The Italians looked at harpsichord as one might look at a violin. It was an aesthetic object. So the decoration of the instrument itself was the primary concern. Its architectural appearance. And all of the decoration is to the outer case, and it's all secondary to the instrument itself. Remember Monty Python used to say, now for something different, completely different, or whatever. Now for something completely different. This is a Flemish harpsichord. Totally different style of decoration. The outside, there we go again. The outside of the case is painted in false marble. And always the same kind of false marble too. If you go to Antwerp and look at the marble in City Hall, that's what you're going to see. And with these, should have practiced on this before it came.
It's okay, glad you're here.
These bands on top, braid bands on top and bottom, completely surrounding the instrument, that's all painted on. And then on the lid, they glued paper. Paper with wood grain printed on it. Kind of silly to paste paper with wood grain on top of wood. But the wood that they used didn't have much figure, so. And then it was always a model, a moralizing model. Tip Transit Gloria Mundi is one of my wife's favorites. Her name is Gloria, for those of you who know her. And the stand is usually some kind of heavy oak stand that's unpainted. Here's another Flemish harpsichord, the same false marble on the outside. A marble on the inside that's too dim for me to read. The keywell, the sharps are bone, cow bone, and the naturals are black stained bogs, actually bog oak that's been darkened by sticking to the bog. And then these heavy melon legs. You can see that there's something going on at the soundboard. I'll talk about that in a minute. There was another decorative style, the Scrapboard style. This was not common. This was extra special if you wanted to pay more for it, which obviously some people did. But here we have what looks like leather. Leather on the outside.
Is this Flemish too?
I'm sorry?
Is it Flemish too?
Is it also Flemish?
Yes, also Flemish.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, sure. Looks like leather with iron straps holding the whole thing together. What I call a scrapboard pattern. And when these straps cross, they painted these precious stones. This one also has Transit Gloria Mundi. The stand here is not original. Okay, so let's look at the keywell. We see these bone naturals, bog oak. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
The bog oak sharps. I think this paper, they also, I'm trying to be careful. I just,
We believe you.
okay. They glued paper to the inside of the case too, as well as the whole keyboard surrounding the instrument on the inside. These little figures here look like seahorses. And in fact, sometimes it is called seahorse paper. But actually they're not seahorses. They are dolphins sitting on top of an acanthus leaf. Okay, dolphins, there we go back to the story of Aaron. Dolphin is so important as a musical theme. Here is a typical soundboard painting of a Flemish instrument. If you bought a Flemish instrument, it came with a soundboard painting. You didn't have any choice. They decorated every inch of these instruments. Sometimes you've been compared to a cuckoo clock made in the Black Forest. A profusion of motifs here, just crammed in. You have flowers, leaves, fruit, people soundboard painting of mine, and even though I knew I should get things in as tightly as I possibly could, I couldn't do any better than that. Couldn't get them turned out.
You mean you own that, or you decorated it?
I decorated it, yeah.
Oh, wow, and Flemish? You must be Flemish.
And here's the rows in the case of Flemish harpsichords. This one is A.R. Heinrichus Rookers. Rookers was a big name in harpsichords in Antwerp. In fact, there were two Rookers brothers that dominated harpsichord building in Antwerp. And they were as famous as Stradivarius was. And there's this wreath surrounding the rose. You can see it better here. And in this case, an angel on each side holding it up. There they are. There's a better look at the rose. The rose itself was made of lead or pewter or sometimes even paper mache, and then gilded gold, real gold. So it looked like a solid gold object there. So let's sum that up. The case, we find this false marble, or this, on some special occasions, the false scrap work. The moldings, I say, are bright. That is, the moldings were cut into the case, but were not painted. The lid had these wood grain papers. Sometimes, instead of that, you had a painting. Sometimes by a rather famous artist. The soundboard had a mandatory soundboard painting. It was a naive, it was a naive, naive but dynamic stuff on paintings. There was a gilt cast metal rose with a floral wreath and with the maker's initials in it. And the outside of the case, the inside of the case, all the way around in the key well were these printed papers. Au naturals, bog, oak, sharps, and balustrade trestle stands, often unpainted. Flemish looked at a harpsichord as both a decorative object as well as a musical object, a musical instrument. And decoration was applied to just about every inch of the instrument. The harpsichord itself, if you looked at it, it represented this improbable idea of a harpsichord-shaped block of marble. But when you opened it up, you were exposed to a garden of delights, the flowers, the fruit, and so on, as well as a moralizing message that is the motto. So the Flemish harpsichord was an object designed to appeal to all the senses. Much more restrained looking instrument. This is an 18th century French instrument. Typical French decoration. It had two colors, darker on the outside, lighter on the inside of the lid, although sometimes they could be one color, same color. Gold bands on the outside of the case, gold bands on the inside of the lid. This, the case, the stand, was in either the Louis XV or Louis XVI style. This is Louis XV. You can see it was also gilded. The keyboard is black naturals and bone-slipped sharps. But it's just a slim piece of bone glued to the top of the sharp. And as you can see, there is a soundboard painting and there is a robe. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute. This is the same thing, but much more elaborate. We find these swangs and these decorations around it. I thought it was so good. The stand is Louis XVI, gilded. They love gold. Gold was expensive too. I mean, it's always been expensive. Gold leaf costs like gold costs, whatever it is. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering, were these commissioned by people? Were these commissioned by people?
I'm sorry, my hearing's not that good.
Were these,
Yeah.
were these commissioned by people?
Oh,
Or were they considered?
if you bought a harpsichord from a French builder, just give me a regular harpsichord, you would get this.
And were they considered status symbols?
That was the basic harpsichord. If you wanted something fancier, pay for it.
It's called light.
The soundboard painting, it's some kind of bucolic scene, I'm not really quite sure, I couldn't figure it out. It's an interesting decoration. Very elaborately decorated instrument. A hunting scene on the inside of the lid, and that hunting scene continues on the outside of the case. Look at that beautiful gold, elaborate Louis XVI stand. You can see that wreath, and you can see something about soundboard painting, but as I say, we'll take a look at that in a little while. One interesting thing about this is that this area here is not painted, not finished, not decorated at all. Bare wood. On a harpsichord this elaborate, why would they leave bare wood there? Well, this harpsichord was originally a Rooker's harpsichord from Flanders. And as I said, the Rooker's families were the most famous harpsichord builders in Europe. If you had a Rooker's harpsichord, you would never throw it out. It would be like throwing out a Stradivarius violin, literally. What you would do is you would have modernized, rebuilt, and it would come as enlarged, and it was split and enlarged. And they did all sorts of shenanigans to make them more playable for contemporary music. So the Flemish paper was removed, but they never got around to putting anything else in its place. How about that for a fancy harpsichord? It shows all the signs of a rebuilt Rooker's instrument. You could see, on rebuilt instruments, you could see construction marks where they added wood. There are several places like this. You can usually spot them and say, aha, that was a rebuilt Rooker's, made it into a French harpsichord. So you can see, although you can't see them now on this slide, but if you look, examine it closely, you can see it. But about 70 years ago, they took the soundboard out to refurbish the instrument. And on the bottom of the soundboard was the name Claude Gougeot, 1769. Claude Gougeot was a famous Paris builder. Built a lot of instruments on which the name board said Claude Gougeot. But this one, the name board said Andreas Rookers. He phonied up a Rookers and counterfeited it. Why would he do a thing like that? Well, again, let's go back to a Stradivarius violin. Compare the price of a Strad to a modern violin. There's no comparison. So if you had a rebuilt Rookers, you could get maybe 10 times as much for it as you could for a brand new instrument. As it is, it's a very fine instrument. Elaborate Louis XV stand, exquisitely carved and gilded, polychrome chinoiserie on the exterior. Beautiful instrument. Another typical French instrument, or another rebuilt Rookers. see the Flemish paper here. Why would they leave the Flemish paper there? Well, if you rebuilt a Rooker's harpsichord, you would want everybody to know this was a Rooker's harpsichord. So you left the evidence there, you left the papers there, you left the Rooker's soundboard painting there, and you had your painters fake more flowers and things so that it would look like Rooker's. Talk about gold. This instrument was originally a Rooker's and was rebuilt 3 times in the 17th and 18th century, enlarged each time. This final enlargement was done by one of the great 18th century builders, Pascal Tascan. And he got finished rebuilding it. He covered the whole case with gold and then painted all these figures over it. But you can still see the Flemish paper there. And the name Rooker's on the name board.
Excuse me, Dr. Kottick.
Yes.
What are those things sticking out along the bottom?
Those things, very observant, yeah. These actually knee levers by which you could control, yeah. You could make crescendos and diminuendos with these things. Yeah. Here's a typical French soundboard. Not nearly the profusion of motifs that we saw in the Flemish. Much more control, leading the eye in every case, right down these areas here. Here's the rose with the builder's initials in them, and the wreaths surrounding the rose. And there's a little vignette here of a bird on a tree stump. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute. Wanted to show you this because Tascan was not only a great builder, he was a great public relations guy. And this is what he painted on his harpsichord. Pascal Tascan Edmond de Blanchet. He studied with another famous builder. His name was Blanchet. So Pascal Tascan, student of Blanchet. No mistaking his pedigree. I love the Tascan painter's style. It's a very quick, almost impressionistic style. Now here's a bird scene on that instrument. Now the bird scenes are always different. It's never exactly the same, but it's always this. You find an island. On the island is a tree stump, dead tree stump. Growing out of the dead tree stump are live branches. The bird's just along for the ride. Live branches growing out of a dead tree trunk, life out of death, resurrection. Not necessarily a religious resurrection symbol, but a symbol of the resurrection of the seasons. So French builders painted their cases, used these gold bands, gold moldings. Sometimes we find chinoiserie, sometimes on the case a representational painting, and other motifs. The lids, painted lids, gold bands. Soundboard has this mandatory painting. Once again, you have no choice. But it was carefully laid out, and the style is much more painterly. There's a gilt representational cast rose with floral garland, and that bird scene. Always the bird, well, not always the bird scene, but almost always. The key well is the blackwood naturals, the bone slit sharps. And the stand was a tray stand that it was actually shoved the harpsichord in as if he was shoving it onto a tray in Louis XV or XVI style. The French considered their harpsichords to be the height of perfection. They didn't want to change anything. The shape and its decoration, that's the way it is. So painted and gilded shapes, form little mounts, and then this painted harpsichord. It just didn't fit in at all. But, okay. This is we're in northern Germany in the 18th century. First of all, I want to show you this double bedside here, and bend at the tail. That was a particularly Germanic kind of thing to do. 18th century German harpsichords loved contrasts. They loved natural wood and paint, which you see here is natural wood and paint. They loved ebony and ivory, and tortoise shell and mother of pearl. You find these things together all the time. This big harpsichord in the Yale collection in New Haven. Here is paint and natural wood. The paint itself is a faux tortoise shell. And on the inside of the lid is a chinoiserie seam. Has 2, 4, 6, 8 legs, some of which actually touch the ground. The keyboard tradition in these German instruments could be light on dark or dark on light. In this case, it's dark sharps, light naturals. Here we see the reverse. Dark naturals, light sharps. I love this instrument because the decorators spared no effort to cover every inch of the instrument and to do something different in every place. The outside is a floral scenes, and it's surrounded by a green false marble. The lid seam is surrounded by a red false marble. And the lid seam is an outdoor concert with a harpsichord. The key well is this ivory finish with chinoiserie. And the sharps are covered with tortoise shell, and this is mother of pearl. Stunning looking instrument, despite the fact that it's so to think of it as pretty ridiculous. This is again, this shows you these contrasts. Here's ebony and ivory, and boy, it seems to me that would just really make your eyes swim and try to play like that. Here's mother of pearl and tortoise shell. And here's a sort of typical German rose, non-representational rose. In this case, descending into the case, like an upside-down wedding cake, and surrounded by a wreath. I love this wreath because you can just imagine the decorator, before the hole was cut for the rose, taking a compass and scribing a circle and saying to himself, I will not come up outside the circle. Sometimes there are no roses on German harpsichords. Instead, there's a little vignette. In this case, we have the goddess Minerva, who is accompanied by a marching band of a lute and a violin. Stunning looking instrument. The instrument itself is fine, but the decoration just overwhelms it. An ivory finish with a chinoiserie all around it, and a stunning stand with a serpentine stretched out at the bottom. There's a story about this because we don't normally know the names of people who decorated these things. They were not famous artists. If you were a famous painter painting on canvas, you weren't decorating harpsichords, believe me. But in this case, the decorator was a guy by the name of Dahly, D-A-H-G-L-Y, who was in the Berlin court. And he was famous for his ivory finishes.
So that was really ivory?
No, it's not ivory, but it looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, normally, if you paint something white, it would darken over age, but his stuff never darkened. So something up north in Germany, painted cases, full finishes, the lids, same as the case. The soundboard could be bare, or it could have some flowers, but if it did have flowers, they're pretty sparse. One here, one there, and so on. If there was a rose, it was one of these geometric roses. Sometimes there's a pastoral or a mythological vignette in place of a rose. The key well is usually the dramatic center of the instrument. This is where your eyes go to when you look at it, because that's where you have these contrasts of paid natural wood and the ivory tortoiseshell mother of pearl. Variety of stands. Northern Germany, the German harpsichords are really elaborate. They're colorful, full of these visual contrasts, but overwhelming in their decoration. Not surprising, they're also among the most colorful sounding harpsichords ever built. Where's the paint? No paint, just natural wood. This is England in the 18th century. England, mainly London, which was the center of harpsichord building. They loved their veneers with contrasting bands and stringing here, sometimes boxwood or other light woods, contrast in that sound well. Always ivory with ivory sharps with black stain. Ivory naturals with black stained wood.
Are those stops, the little white?
Those are stop knobs, yes. Okay, who wasn't to notice the knee levers before the pedals to do the same thing that the knee levers did? Always start on a trestle stand of some kind. No soundboard painting. Sometimes a rose. There were two builders in London competing with each other. One of them used a rose, the other one didn't. This is a young Japanese student playing one of these instruments. And notice the beautiful burl wood here on the side. A burl wood, B-U-R-L, is wood taken from a portion of a tree where there's been a lot of conflict. So the grain is growing in all directions. It's hard to use, but it certainly gives you a beautiful effect.
Excuse me, is it from the root?
I'm sorry?
Is it from the root or like a quarter round, or is it from the root? Is it from the root or the quarter round, the burl?
No, it's not necessarily from a root. It could be from where a branch meets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It could also be from the root.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Notice what looks at first glance and say, hey, is that Flemish paper? No, not at all. It's not. They're not Flemish motifs, and they're inlays rather than paper. But this builder is saying, hey, I'm descended from those guys. Beautiful burl wood on this instrument. The bedside is divided into 3 sections. Here's a good look at the key well. Dr. was Kirkland Fidget Landini, 1755. And you can see that this is certainly not memories. It would be one thing to went back one. All right. Not many of us see any Flemish motifs, but natural wood. First I made them of walnut, then later on mahogany. Sumptuous, beautiful, cross-banding, stringy with oyster wood, satin wood. Burl wood's used a lot. The lid, same as the case. The soundboard, no decoration, except for one builder who used a rose. Keywell had natural woods, veneers, marquetry, ivory naturals, black sharps. Stands were always trestle stands, either straight or turned.
And maybe I'm imagining this, but these instruments look bigger.
I'm sorry?
These instruments look bigger than the German,
They are big instruments.
and they also look more angular.
Yes, they are. That's a good observation.
Right.
Yeah. There tends to be the bend side tends to be straight until the very end and it hooks. Yeah. The English consider the harpsichord to be furniture, primarily furniture. And they were examples of the spectacular use of natural wood. Well, we call it natural wood, but there's nothing natural about cutting a veneer from a log and gluing it onto something else. The large areas are broken up by these cross-bandings, stringing. Keywells often had contrasting woods and marquetry, and we find even that the hinges add to the ornamental effect of the instrument. What about contemporary decoration? I'm talking about 21st century. Remember the floozy? That was floozy number 1. Here's floozy number 2. Harpsichord was built, this was an Italian-style harpsichord. It was built by William Ross, a very fine builder. I took this picture about 1980. He had a girlfriend whose name was Anita Smith. He took a picture of Anita and blew it up and glued it to the inside of his case. When I took this picture, that's Bill Ross right there. Oops. And Anita was standing right there. Didn't seem to mind taking the picture at all. I love this instrument because it's, again, an inner Italian in an outer case, but the outer case is very sparse and it's made to look like branches sort of encompassing the instrument, sort of lovingly folding it in. Very effective. When paint was used, it was usually splashes of color. Do we see a splash? Look. Splash on the inside of the lid and splashes on the outside of the case. Here, a stark black instrument with this. This very colorful section here on the inside of the lid. And one of my favorites, painted by Lisa Creed. I happen to know Lisa, and I told her that I looked at painting on this instrument, particularly the correspondence between the lid and the outside of the case here, where one seems to melt into the other. But I said, you know, this always reminded me of the yellow brick road from the Wizard of Oz. She didn't like that at all. The keywell is someplace where sometimes decorators get kind of whimsical. This builder's name was Richard, R-I-C-H-A-O-N-D, Kingston. I didn't know without that, but okay. So to sum it up, we've only seen a few examples, but generally the cases are abstract, non-representation. The lids, same thing. Soundboard, almost always a preference for clean soundboard, no rose. Keywell sometimes has something whimsical. And the stands are simple trestle stands. So now you know all about harpsichord decoration. No, there's still a lot we haven't talked about. All of these we haven't talked about, and other forms of the harpsichord. But you now know plenty. You can certainly impress your friends next time you're gathered around a harpsichord. There are a lot of things like a Flemish harpsichord to me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end. We're happy to entertain questions. Yes.
Well, the first one is when you were presenting the description of the Northern German instruments, you said that not only were they more colorful in their decoration, but they had a more colorful sound.
Yes.
I know this is not the focus of your presentation,
Yeah.
but how does one get a more colorful sound
Okay.
out of a harpsichord?
Yeah. Most elaborate harpsichords have 3 sets of strings, 2 at normal pitch, and 1 an octave above that. German harpsichords sometimes are so elaborate that they have a sub-octave set of strings, then 2 normal strings, then strings an octave higher, and strings an octave higher than that. That's pretty elaborate.
That's a lot of
That's pretty-
sound. Wow.
That makes a big bang. Yeah.
And so, was that one of the traditional ways that they, when they were remodeling or refurbishing a harpsichord, they would do those types of things with the strings as refurbishment? Or did they add another
The Germans
keyboard?
were added to rebuilding the Flemish harpsichords. Although Flemish, Germans, and English all were influenced by Flemish harpsichord building.
Okay.
But only the French really went in for this rebuilding.
The first question, when did they start having a second manual?
The Rooker's instruments in the 17th century had 2 manuals, however, they were transposing. They were a fifth apart. I might say, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, because if you need to transpose this sort of thing. But performers learned to transpose as part of their education. I mean, you couldn't find, you'd be hard-pressed to find harpsichordists who couldn't transpose. So there was a series of articles on these double manual instruments, and somebody said, well, if you had an assistant choir director who couldn't transpose, this would be good. And the next article said, well, if you had an assistant choir director who couldn't transpose, you sooner hit him with a stick than buy him a harpsichord.
Another question, when they rebuilt an instrument, did they extend the keyboards there?
Yes, they did. The Flemish instruments were basically 4 octaves. The French expanded them to 5 octaves. That's making a big change in the instrument. Yes, ma'am.
When did they start using the double keyboard?
When did it start moving?
Is that what you just asked? Yes. Double keyboard? Yeah.
Oh, when did they start making them the same pitch?
Okay.
Okay, that was in the 18th century.
Okay.
Yeah, they took these Flemish instruments and put French keyboards into them, rebuilt them that way. Yeah.
I have seen all of these harpsichords, but I haven't seen a single stool that the player would sit on. So were those ever decorated in similar ways, or were they purely utilitarian?
That's a great question, and I can't answer it very well. I have seen photos where stands match the instrument, but I can't say that, the chairs were match the instrument. I can't say that the chairs were original. I don't know.
Well, it would make sense because different people play
Yeah. Well, a lot of these instruments were on high stands and they were played standing up.
Oh.
There are some Vermeer paintings of a woman at a virginal, you may have seen these, and she's standing and playing. They were smaller in those days.
You don't have any pictures of the ones you built. What about the ones you built? You
Um,
don't have any pictures?
well, that's for somebody else to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to take the privilege of telling you just a little bit about Dr. Kottick. It sounds like many of you know him. It sounds like many of you know Dr. Kottick, but I want to tell you just a little bit about him. For those of you that don't know him, he was in the music department at the University of Iowa for many years. Started out as a trombone player.
Still play trombone.
Yeah. And then he developed this side interest in harpsichords, and he is the world authority on harpsichords.
Wow.
I think it's very
Congratulations.
I think he knows more about harpsichords than anybody else in the world.
Well, there may be people who know more, but they're not here tonight.
And so he got interested in building these, and he has these elaborate harpsichords that we're seeing. He built over 50 of these.
Wow.
55.
55
Wow.
over many years. They have very intricate mechanical innards to them, and he totally understands how that all works. You hear him talking about the strings and the hammers and so forth, and he understands all the details of how those work. So he's done that.
Where are they?
Most of them are in the Midwest, but they are scattered on the coast and up north and down south. A couple in Europe down there.
You have 3 in your house?
I'm sorry?
You have 3 in your house?
I have 3 harpsichords in my house right
Do you play them very much?
now. I am ashamed to admit that I'm not a player.
Oh,
Not that I haven't tried. I really tried hard for about 5 years. I really worked at it. I could play a little repertoire I could play, but my technique was just not really good at all. It just not suited for the harpsichord. I also play woodwinds. I play the recorder. And my wife said, I don't understand it. You do this so easily. Why can't you do this? It doesn't work that way.
He is also a conductor.
Yes.
He has conducted a lot of musicals here, and for a number of years conducted an annual Messiah that the audience could sing along with.
So you're talking Iowa City Community Theater,
Yes.
the City Circle, at the CCPA in Coralville. And most of the time when you hear or see a musical, of course with a band or orchestra, he's the director. And he's done that for quite a few years. How many of you directed? You know?
All right.
Lost count.
Oh,
I find it hard to believe, and I don't think you'll care if I tell you, Dr. Kottick is 91 years old.
You're kidding. Still clicking.
that's not a
And he
joke.
still rides his bike.
Wow.
And I can also attest to the fact that he was not only my undergraduate advisor, but he was also my gym advisor about 15 years ago. And he was very good at both.
That's a wonderful wife, Gloria. And, anything else I should tell you about him? Sherry?
I thank you for that.
Wow.
Very nice.
Thank you for coming. One last question.
Yes.
How did you get into doing this? You were on the
Yeah, well, for some reason, I was always interested in the harpsichord.